Aarohi Menra was the picture of a perfect bride, but beneath her flawless smile hid a past entwined with secrets and crime, while Devansh Kareel, the groom who thought he had found his happily ever after, uncovered a truth so devastating on their wedding night that it ended not in love, but in murder. The winter air in Toronto carried a crisp bite, yet inside the decorated banquet hall, warmth and celebration flowed like an endless stream. Guests arrived in shimmering outfits, their laughter echoing against the walls as music filled the space. Chandeliers bathed the crowd in golden light, and every detail of the evening seemed to radiate perfection. At the center of it all stood Aarohi Menra, the bride who commanded every eye in the room. Draped in a red and gold lehenga that shimmered under the lights, she moved with quiet grace, offering smiles that appeared as flawless as the diamonds around her neck. To those who looked on, Aarohi was the very picture of happiness. She had stepped into a life that seemed secure, stable, and blessed. Beside her was Devansh Kareel, tall and well-groomed, the kind of man who inspired admiration without speaking a word. Years of hard work in Canada had shaped him into a figure of success. He had studied tirelessly, built a career in software consultancy, and purchased a home that now stood as proof of his perseverance. His family in India considered him the perfect son, one who had finally earned the right to marry and settle down. Meeting Aarohi felt like destiny to them, a union of two seemingly perfect lives. For Devansh, this day felt like a reward for all the sacrifices he had made while living away from home. The ceremony unfolded with ritual precision, each step carefully observed by the elder. The couple exchanged garlands, walked around the sacred fire, and listened to the prayers that bound them together in the eyes of tradition and faith. Cameras clicked, relatives cheered, and the young bridesmaids giggled as they watched the union unfold like a scene from a storybook. The guests whispered about how lucky Devansh was to have found someone as beautiful and cultured as Aarohi. To them, she seemed untouched by the complications of modern life, a rare gem who carried herself with modesty and grace. As the night moved forward, the celebrations only grew louder. Plates of fragrant biryani and butter chicken made their way across tables, glasses clinked, and music invited everyone to the dance floor. Devansh, though usually reserved, allowed himself to enjoy the moment, surrounded by laughter and joy. His bride stood close, her jewelry glinting under the lights, her smile wide enough to conceal every hidden truth. Friends of the family recorded the dances on their phones, capturing memories that seemed destined to last a lifetime. But behind the glittering veil of the event, Aarohi's thoughts drifted far from the celebrations. The life she displayed to everyone was only one side of her existence, carefully constructed for this very day. Her past lingered like a shadow she hoped would never be exposed, and her secrets sat buried beneath layers of silence. She moved through the hall like a performer who had mastered her role, ensuring no one would glimpse the life she had lived before stepping into this marriage. The bride and groom left the hall late into the night, stepping into a car decorated with flowers and ribbons. Family members cheered and waved as they disappeared into the cold streets, the start of their married life written in every blessing and every whispered wish. To the onlookers, the couple's future appeared solid, the kind of story that promised happiness and prosperity. Yet, within Aarohi's luggage, tucked neatly under folded clothes and wrapped in plain envelopes, lay the first traces of a truth waiting to shatter the illusion. The city skyline stretched out as they drove toward their apartment, the night air filled with a silence that masked the storm yet to come. For Devansh, the day had been nothing short of perfect, and the woman beside him seemed like a gift after years of solitude. But perfection often hides cracks, and beneath the layers of makeup, jewelry, and carefully crafted smiles, Aarohi carried a past that would soon turn their marriage into a nightmare. The stage was set, though no one in that glittering hall could have imagined how quickly joy would transform into tragedy. Devansh carried the weight of celebration in his heart as he entered the apartment that night, believing that his life had finally aligned into place. The building, a tall glass structure overlooking downtown Toronto, glowed faintly under the city lights. Inside, The home smelled of fresh paint and polished wood, a space he had carefully prepared for his bride. White lilies stood in a vase on the dining table, and a bottle of unopened champagne waited by the counter. For Devansh, it was more than a home. It was a promise of stability, of new beginnings, of a future he could proudly share with his family back in India. Aarohi, dressed still in fragments of her bridal attire, glanced around with polite curiosity, her smile unwavering, her eyes betraying nothing of the storm she carried inside. As Devansh unpacked her luggage later that night, it was not suspicion that guided him, but a practical habit of organizing. He opened the first suitcase and found carefully folded saris, jewelry boxes and packets of sweets her family had sent along. In the second, however, his hands paused. Beneath layers of clothes wrapped tightly in tissue, lay a small bundle of documents. Curiosity turned to unease as he sifted through them. A Canadian driver's license, with a different address and a name that looked slightly altered, caught his attention first. The photograph was Aarohi's, yet the identity written on the card felt like a stranger's. Next, he uncovered a set of bank slips tied together with a thin rubber band. The deposits were frequent, large, and carried dates that stretched back years. Most of them were connected to accounts Devansh had never heard of, all opened in Canada long before she had supposedly returned to India to prepare for marriage. His pulse quickened as he shuffled through the next set of papers, legal documents and photographs, each one raising more questions than the last. The pictures stopped him cold. There she was, his bride, smiling intimately beside a man he had never met. The man appeared younger, stylish, with a sharp face and eyes that held the confidence of someone deeply familiar with her. In one image, they posed together in front of a nightclub sign, in another in the passenger seat of a sleek car. The name scribbled across one of the documents finally gave shape to the face. Rehan Veyra. Shock coursed through Devansh as he pieced the fragments together. The carefully woven image of Aarohi as a dutiful daughter and modest bride collapsed before his eyes. Instead, he saw a woman who had lived a secret life, who had concealed an entirely different identity from him and his family. The smile she had carried through the wedding, the modest gestures that won over the elders, all of it began to feel like part of a performance. Devansh had built his dreams on an illusion, and the discovery hit him with a force he could not contain. The apartment grew heavy with silence as he sat on the edge of the bed, the documents scattered before him. His mind churned with questions. How long had she known this man? Why had she agreed to marry him if she was already tied to someone else? The betrayal cut deep, sharper than any wound he had endured in his life abroad. For years he had endured loneliness and sacrifice, working tirelessly to build a reputation strong enough to carry him back to India as a man ready for marriage. Now, on the very night that was supposed to begin his happiness, he was left staring at proof that his bride had led him into a trap of deception. Aarohi moved quietly about the room, removing her jewelry, her expression unreadable. Devansh watched her from across the space, his hands trembling as they clutched the evidence. The warmth of earlier hours was gone, replaced by a coldness that seeped into every corner of the apartment. His future no longer seemed golden but poisoned, and though he had only uncovered the first layers of truth, the damage was already done. The celebration of their union was now tainted by doubt, betrayal and a rising tide of anger that would not let him rest. The night that had begun with joy had shifted into something darker, setting in motion events that neither of them could stop. Devansh did not sleep that night. His eyes remained fixed on the papers, photographs, and slips scattered across the bed like pieces of a puzzle he wished he could ignore. Each image of Aarohi with Rehan Veyra burned into his memory, refusing to fade. By dawn, his chest felt heavy with rage and disbelief. The woman who had stood beside him at the wedding altar was not the same woman documented in those photographs. This realization, sharp and unforgiving, gnawed at him until he felt hollow. The flawless bride adored by his family had been a mask hiding a dangerous double life. In the days that followed, Devansh began quietly investigating on his own. While Aarohi pretended to settle into her new role as a married woman, arranging the kitchen, Calling relatives back in India, and playing the part of a dutiful wife, he scoured through her belongings, and checked every detail he could find. More documents emerged, airline tickets showing repeated trips between Toronto and Vancouver, all under the alternate name on her license. Receipts revealed expensive purchases from high-end stores, transactions that far exceeded what a student or ordinary worker could afford. He discovered a second phone tucked inside one of her handbags, its gallery filled with images of nights out, bottles of champagne, and Rehan at her side. The deeper he dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Aarohi had not simply been reckless. She had been running schemes with Rehan, tricking investors into pouring money into fake venture. Devansh found references to companies that didn't exist, contracts signed with fabricated names, and deposits that flowed into accounts later drained of every dollar. It became clear that his bride had been part of a pattern of fraud long before she agreed to marry him. To her family, she had painted herself as a woman eager to settle down, to return to tradition. But in Canada, she was another person entirely calculating, bold, and deeply entangled in a criminal world. Devansh could not help but feel like a pawn in her game. He realized she had likely agreed to the marriage not out of love, but as a way to maintain her dual identity. With him, she gained respectability, a shield of stability that made her look like an ordinary, trustworthy immigrant wife. With Rehan, she could continue her darker life unnoticed. The betrayal stung more than the lies themselves. He thought of his parents back in India, who had invested their faith and blessings into this marriage, and he imagined their shame if the truth ever surfaced. The image of their happiness, so bright during the wedding, twisted into something unbearable. Late at night, Devansh would sit by the living room window, staring out at the glittering city lights, his mind circling the same questions. Had Aarohi ever intended to stay with him? Would she eventually drain his accounts too, leaving him broken just like her past victims? The thought of being used, of being paraded as a trophy while she carried on with another man, cut deeper than he could endure. He began to notice small signs he had overlooked, the way she avoided eye contact when he asked simple questions, the way her phone vibrated with late-night messages she quickly dismissed, the way she always seemed distant, even when sitting across from him. Each discovery fed his growing obsession. He could no longer see the woman he married. Instead, he saw an actor wearing a mask. Aarohi was both wife and stranger, saint and criminal, victim and manipulator. The paradox haunted him until it poisoned every thought he had. He told no one, not even his closest friends, about what he had found. To the outside world, they were newlyweds building a life together. But within the walls of their apartment, Devansh's silence grew heavy, and his anger began to fester into something dark. As Aarohi continued to move seamlessly between roles, caring bride by day, secret schemer by night, Devansh's patience collapsed. The life he had built, the sacrifices he had made, felt stolen from him by the woman he now realized he never truly knew. He began to see her not as a partner but as a threat, a danger to his future and his family's honor. And as his resentment swelled, the stage was being set for a moment of violence that would end the masquerade forever. The night that should have been remembered as the beginning of a lifelong union became instead the crucible where years of suppressed rage and sudden betrayal ignited. The apartment, once decorated with flowers and soft lights to welcome the bride, had turned into a silent chamber, filled with an unbearable weight. Devansh's mind had been racing for days, spiraling through the evidence of deceit he had uncovered. Every time his eyes met Aarohi's, he no longer saw the woman his family blessed him with, but the fraud who had infiltrated his home, his heart, and his future. By the time the wedding celebrations had faded and the last calls from relatives stopped, his anger had reached a point where it could no longer be contained. It began with suspicion, but now it had grown into an obsession that consumed his thoughts. The documents, the photographs with Rehan, the hidden bank accounts, all of it echoed in his mind until it was impossible to ignore. He stared at her as she moved across the room that evening, carefully undoing her hair and folding her bridal dupatta, as though she were nothing more than an actress finishing a performance. To Devansh, her silence felt like arrogance, as if she thought her secrets were invisible. The betrayal felt so raw that even the smallest gestures, her smile, her calm tone, her carefully measured words, only deepened the storm inside him. The apartment walls seemed to close in around them as the night stretched on. Devansh confronted her, no longer able to hold back the fury. The questions poured from him, his voice trembling with years of pent-up frustration and the fresh sting of humiliation. Aarohi, caught between the roles she had crafted for herself, faltered under his gaze. She offered half-hearted explanations, evasions that only fed the fire burning inside him. In that moment, Devansh no longer cared for truth or lies. He saw only a woman who had played him for a fool, who had mocked the life he had built with sweat and sacrifice. The rage took hold with a force he had never felt before. His hands shook as anger surged through him, no longer restrained by logic or reason. The man who had once been admired for his calm discipline now became a storm unleashed. He struck her, the sound echoing through the apartment, breaking the silence like glass. For a moment the reality of what he had done hung heavy in the air, but the sight of her shocked expression only reignited his fury. He lashed out again and again, each blow fueled by a mixture of shame, betrayal, and a desperation to reclaim the control he felt slipping away. Aarohi cried out, stumbling back, her carefully constructed image of elegance crumbling before him, but her attempts to defend herself, her pleas, only made the betrayal sharper in his mind. Every denial, every word she tried to muster, sounded to him like another lie. The storm inside Devansh had grown too strong. It drowned out reason, drowned out the memory of the vows they had taken, drowned out even the echoes of his parents' hopes. All that remained was the raw, violent urge to destroy the mask she had worn so convincingly. Minutes stretched into a blur of chaos. The decorated apartment, filled with symbols of a new beginning, bore the marks of violence, shattered glass, overturned furniture, and the chilling stillness that followed. Aarohi collapsed, her body no longer able to withstand the force of his fury. The room, once glowing with promise, now stood in eerie silence. The lilies on the dining table, once vibrant, seemed to wilt under the oppressive air of tragedy. Devansh stood above her, his breath heavy, his hands trembling. The weight of what he had done pressed against him, yet his mind was too clouded to fully grasp the finality of it. The woman he had married, the woman who had deceived him, now lay motionless at his feet. The apartment, once filled with light and music, had transformed into the scene of a nightmare. On what should have been the happiest night of their lives, the illusion shattered completely, leaving behind only violence, silence, and a future consumed by ruin. Morning light crept slowly through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the room where silence had taken hold. The wedding garlands that still hung on the wall looked strangely out of place, their bright colors clashing with the grim reality that lay beneath them. Devansh sat motionless on the edge of the bed, his clothes disheveled, his face pale. His mind raced but could not settle. Hours had passed since the storm of violence ended, yet the echoes of that night replayed in his head like a broken record. Aarohi's lifeless body lay on the floor, and the apartment that was meant to be their sanctuary had turned into a prison of his own making. The first signs of alarm came from the outside world. Neighbors, having heard muffled noises during the night, began to wonder if something was wrong. A concerned woman living across the hall knocked on his door that morning, asking if everything was fine. Devansh, frozen in fear, did not answer. His silence only deepened suspicion. By noon, the building's caretaker noticed the lack of movement from the apartment, and decided to call authorities. When police arrived, their knocks were sharp, echoing through the still air until the door was forced open. What they found inside erased any illusion of a happy wedding night. The scene shocked even seasoned officers. A bride, still partly dressed in her wedding attire, lay beaten beyond recognition. Her jewelry had been torn, her makeup smeared, and the flowers in her hair crushed against the floor. The trail of destruction told the story without words. Anger, confrontation, and violence that spiraled beyond control. Devansh was taken into custody without resistance. He sat quietly as officers cuffed his wrists, his eyes hollow, his voice silent. For the neighbors who had celebrated the couple's union just hours earlier,
the news spread like wildfire. The image of a perfect marriage collapsed instantly into a tale of horror. Investigators wasted no time digging into Aarohi's life, and the truths that emerged stunned everyone who thought they knew her. Documents hidden in her luggage revealed multiple identities, offshore accounts, and fraudulent business dealings connected to victims across Canada. Her association with Rehan Veyra quickly surfaced, painting the picture of a double life few could have imagined. To her family in India, Aarohi had always been the disciplined, dutiful daughter preparing to settle down. But to Canadian authorities, she was now linked to a series of scams and suspicious partnerships. Rehan himself became a shadow in the investigation. Detectives discovered his name across financial records and photographs, but when they attempted to locate him, he had already vanished. His last known appearance was near Toronto the day of the wedding, yet no trace remained afterward. Speculation grew that Aarohi's marriage to Devansh had been a calculated move, a cover to sustain her hidden operations, while keeping suspicion away. Her death, however, ended the charade abruptly, leaving behind only unanswered questions. The case drew intense media attention. Headlines captured the story with grim fascination: the bride with two lives, the groom consumed by betrayal, the hidden criminal networks behind her polished image. Public opinion split sharply. Some saw Devansh as a man pushed to the edge by deceit, his rage ignited by unbearable humiliation. Others condemned him outright as a killer who could have chosen restraint instead of violence. Across both India and Canada, the tragedy became a subject of endless debate, exposing the dangers of secrets, lies, and the fragile boundaries of trust in marriage. For Devansh, the reality was brutal. He sat in a cold cell, stripped of the life he had worked to build, haunted by what he had done. The wedding photographs, once symbols of hope, now stood as cruel reminders of how quickly happiness can dissolve into despair. He thought of his parents, their pride shattered, their faith destroyed. The weight of dishonor pressed on him even heavier than the charges he now faced. His dreams of a family, a future, and respectability had been crushed in a single night of uncontrollable rage. In the end, the tragedy left behind no victors. Aarohi's secrets, though shocking, died with her. Rehan's whereabouts remained unknown, his role in her life unfinished and unexplained. Devansh's fate lay in the hands of the courts, but no sentence could undo what had been lost. The story that began with music, blessings, and promises ended with sirens, handcuffs, and silence. The apartment where love was supposed to grow became instead a haunting reminder of how illusions, betrayal, and anger can turn even the most beautiful beginnings into the darkest of endings.